James and Sarah had always dreamed of owning a home in a picturesque neighborhood where they could build lasting memories and enjoy the beauty of suburban life. After years of saving and searching, they finally found their ideal home in Pine Crest Gardens, a charming community that seemed to promise everything they had ever wanted. Nestled among lush trees and vibrant gardens, the house boasted a quaint porch where they envisioned relaxing evenings and joyful gatherings with friends and family. The couple felt an overwhelming sense of hope as they unpacked boxes, each item reminding them of their shared dreams and future together. However, their excitement quickly turned to apprehension as they began to navigate the dynamics of their new neighborhood. The local homeowners association, led by the formidable Deborah Morgan, had an iron grip on the community. While at first glance it seemed that the HOA was merely focused on maintaining property values and ensuring a pleasant environment, James and Sarah soon learned that there was much more lurking beneath the surface. Deborah Morgan was no ordinary HOA president. She was known for her unwavering authority and relentless enforcement of rules. As the couple settled into their new home, they were introduced to her during a community meeting. Deborah's sharp demeanor and controlling presence left a lasting impression on them, one that would soon become central to their lives. The initial weeks passed relatively uneventfully, but cracks in the idyllic facade began to show when Sarah's disability came into play. Sarah had been living with a physical limitation for many years, requiring her to use a wheelchair for mobility. Her condition had shaped her resilience and determination, but it also made her vulnerable in ways she never anticipated. As the couple began to acclimate to their surroundings, Deborah took an interest in Sarah's situation, not for compassion but as an opportunity for control. It started subtly at first. The HOA imposed fines for minor infractions that seemed trivial in nature, but which quickly accumulated into significant sums. Each fine was accompanied by condescending letters from Deborah that dripped with disdain. The couple felt targeted, especially when they realized that these penalties appeared to be disproportionately aimed at Sarah because of her disability. Things escalated further when Deborah's actions turned malicious. One particularly shocking incident saw Sarah's wheelchair chained to their porch, a brazen act meant not only to intimidate but also to humiliate. It became painfully clear that they were in a battle against not just an overreaching association, but against individuals who wielded power without accountability or compassion. In this dark moment, James and Sarah faced the daunting reality of their situation. They were trapped in a nightmare orchestrated by those who should have been serving their community. Yet within this struggle lay an ember of resistance sparked by Sarah's unyielding spirit. She refused to let fear dictate her life as she began contemplating ways to fight back against Deborah's oppressive regime. As they navigated through the chaos created by the HOA, James supported Sarah every step of the way. Together, they began reaching out for help, looking for allies among their neighbors who might share their frustrations or feel similarly oppressed by Deborah's iron-fisted rule. Little did they know that this journey would lead them down a path filled with unexpected connections and ultimately put them at odds with not just local authorities, but also state powers. Their fight would soon become emblematic of a broader struggle against corruption and abuse of power within homeowners associations, a situation that would resonate far beyond the confines of Pine Crest Gardens. The sun shone brightly on the day James and Sarah attended their first homeowners association meeting in Pine Crest Gardens. They approached the community center with a mix of curiosity and excitement, eager to learn more about the neighborhood and its residents. They hoped it would be an opportunity to introduce themselves and perhaps connect with others in the community. But beneath that hopeful veneer lay an atmosphere charged with tension, as the couple was about to discover the true nature of their new surroundings. As they entered the meeting room, they were greeted by a small gathering of familiar faces, most of whom seemed to regard them with a mix of wariness and intrigue. Among these figures stood Deborah Morgan, the HOA president, exuding an air of authority and control that immediately set her apart from the rest. With her perfectly coiffed hair and tailored suit, she commanded attention as she called the meeting to order, her voice sharp and unwavering. Deborah began by outlining the rules and regulations governing Pine Crest Gardens, her tone leaving little room for questions or dissent. James and Sarah listened intently, noting how Deborah emphasized adherence to guidelines designed to maintain property values and aesthetics. While they understood the need for some level of oversight, it quickly became apparent that Deborah's approach was far from collaborative. It was dictatorial. Throughout the meeting, Deborah shared anecdotes about past infractions and how she had dealt with them, each story laced with an unsettling pride in her power to enforce compliance. The couple exchanged uneasy glances as they began to realize that this was not going to be a welcoming community filled with friendly neighbors. Instead, it would be governed by fear and intimidation. As the meeting progressed, it became evident that Deborah had a particular interest in maintaining a certain image for Pine Crest Gardens. When discussing rules related to home appearance and community standards, she made veiled comments about those who did fit the mold. James felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he sensed an undercurrent of discrimination behind her words. He couldn't shake the feeling that this woman wielded her authority like a weapon. When it was finally time for new homeowners to introduce themselves, James took a deep breath, hoping their enthusiasm might soften the tension in the room. "Hello, everyone. We're James and Sarah," he said with a smile. "We're excited to be here and looking forward to getting to know all of you." The room responded with polite nods, but Deborah's eyes narrowed ever so slightly as she leaned forward in her chair. "Welcome," she said coolly. "Just remember that we take our community guidelines seriously." The implication hung heavily in the air, leaving James feeling both anxious and frustrated. After the meeting concluded, Sarah turned to James with a mix of concern and disbelief. They both knew they needed to be cautious moving forward but couldn't help but feel apprehensive about what lay ahead. As they left the community center, Sarah whispered her fears about fitting in, fears that would soon become painfully relevant. In the days following their initial encounter with the HOA, strange things began happening around their home. Fines arrived in the mail for minor issues, complaints lodged by anonymous sources that seemed absurd when viewed through any rational lens. A sense of paranoia crept into their lives as they realized they were being watched. It became clear that Deborah Morgan had no interest in fostering community spirit. Instead, she thrived on exerting control over those who dared to challenge her authority. This first encounter laid a foundation of fear, but also ignited a spark within Sarah, a determination to stand against what they realized was not just an overbearing HOA president, but a system built on intimidation and oppression. Little did they know that this spark would soon transform into a flame of resistance that would challenge not just their local community, but potentially change laws at a state level. As James and Sarah settled into their new home in Pine Crest Gardens, they believed they were entering a supportive community where neighbors cared for one another. However, the reality soon began to unravel when Deborah Morgan and her associates turned their attention to Sarah's disability. A lifelong condition requiring her to use a wheelchair had never defined Sarah. Instead, it had shaped her into a resilient and determined individual. Yet in this new neighborhood, it quickly became evident that her disability would place a target squarely on her back. At first, the couple noticed subtle changes in the way some neighbors interacted with them. Whispers seemed to follow them as they walked down the street, and glances were exchanged that hinted at judgment rather than acceptance. It was disheartening, but nothing could have prepared them for the outright hostility that would soon emerge from the HOA. It began with petty complaints filed against them, allegations that their home wasn't compliant with neighborhood standards. The fines started rolling in, each letter more accusatory than the last. "Violation of community rules regarding property maintenance," read one notice, citing an overgrown flower bed that had been lovingly tended to by Sarah herself. The couple couldn't fathom how something so trivial could warrant such scrutiny, but it didn't stop there. One fateful morning, as Sarah prepared to head out for a leisurely stroll around the neighborhood, she discovered that her wheelchair had been chained to their porch. The sight was shocking and infuriating, a deliberate act of intimidation meant to humiliate her and send a clear message. She wasn't welcome in Pine Crest Gardens. James was beside himself with anger when he found out. Who would do something so cruel? He demanded as he worked to free Sarah's wheelchair. The pain in his voice echoed his frustration not just for Sarah, but for the injustice they both felt at that moment. This was no longer just about unfair fines. It was a blatant assault on Sarah's dignity. As they confronted Deborah about this outrageous act, her response was chillingly dismissive. "Perhaps you should consider whether you can meet our community standards," she sneered, her eyes betraying no hint of compassion or remorse. It became clear that Deborah was intent on making an example of Sarah, a vulnerable target who could be easily bullied because of her disability. The couple struggled to comprehend how someone in a position of power could wield it with such cruelty. As illegal fines continued to mount and threats grew more aggressive, James began to realize that Deborah's intentions were not just personal. They were part of a larger pattern of discrimination against those perceived as different or weaker within the community. Despite the emotional toll these actions were taking on them, Sarah remained resolute. She understood that this fight was not just about her. It was about standing up against systemic oppression faced by many others who might not have the same strength or support. She began documenting every incident meticulously, filing complaints, and gathering evidence of the HOA's abuses. It was during one of these darker moments that Sarah found herself reaching out to local advocacy groups designed to support individuals facing discrimination due to disabilities. Connecting with others who had endured similar battles helped reignite her determination, reminding her that she was not alone in this struggle. Sarah's resolve grew stronger with each passing day, as she recognized that their fight against Deborah and the HOA represented a larger battle against intolerance and inequity in their community. In sharing their story with others, she found unexpected allies who rallied behind her cause, knowing full well that their fight would ultimately lead to something much bigger than themselves, a potential movement toward justice for all residents facing similar challenges. Little did they know that this harrowing experience would catalyze connections that would echo far beyond Pine Crest Gardens, laying the groundwork for change not only within their community but also at the state level. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in Pine Crest Gardens escalated, and the harassment that James and Sarah faced from the HOA became increasingly unbearable. What began as minor infractions and petty complaints transformed into a relentless barrage of intimidation tactics orchestrated by Deborah Morgan and her associates. Each new day brought fresh challenges, leaving the couple feeling as if they were living in a perpetual state of siege. The illegal fines continued to mount, each one more ludicrous than the last. One morning, Sarah found a notice on her door claiming that their garden gnomes violated community aesthetic rules. Another time, they received a citation stating that their porch furniture was deemed unsightly, even though it had been carefully chosen to fit the overall charm of their home. These arbitrary regulations seemed designed not to uphold community standards, but to undermine Sarah's confidence and create an atmosphere of fear. In addition to the financial harassment, more personal attacks began to surface. Neighbors who had once been friendly now avoided them or offered condescending smiles that felt anything but warm. Sarah felt the chill of isolation creeping in as whispers followed her wherever she went, snippets of conversations that hinted at her being a burden to the community. The very space they had dreamed of calling home morphed into a prison where they were constantly scrutinized. One particularly distressing incident occurred when Sarah attempted to join a local yoga class at the community center. She arrived with enthusiasm, eager to connect with others and find some normalcy in her life. However, upon entering, she was met with disapproving stares and hushed murmurs. Deborah was there, of course, sitting prominently at the front of the room, her presence suffocating any sense of welcome. Sarah could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her as Deborah loudly declared that only those who can keep up should attend such classes. With each word, it became painfully clear that Sarah was not only unwelcome but actively pushed out. The final straw came when James received an anonymous letter containing threats disguised as warnings. "You don't belong here," it read ominously. "If you think you can challenge us, think again." The letter was unsigned, yet it carried the unmistakable mark of Deborah's disdainful influence. Fear coursed through James. He knew they were in deeper waters than they had ever anticipated. Feeling cornered but unwilling to back down, Sarah decided it was time to take action. She organized a small gathering at their home, inviting neighbors who had shown kindness or understanding in their interactions with her and James. This meeting was not just about seeking support, it was about uniting against the oppressive tactics of the HOA. To their surprise, several neighbors joined them, others who had felt marginalized by Deborah's strict enforcement of rules and who shared stories of their own encounters with intimidation. As they exchanged experiences, it became evident that James and Sarah were not alone in their fight against an unfair system. In that moment of solidarity, hope began to blossom amidst despair. With renewed vigor, Sarah resolved to amplify their struggle by reaching out to local advocacy groups and media outlets willing to cover stories about discrimination against individuals with disabilities. The couple understood that shining a light on their situation could lead to support from a broader community and might even draw attention from those in positions of power. While the campaign against them intensified, James and Sarah discovered strength in numbers. They began documenting every incident meticulously, keeping records of fines, communications with the HOA, and testimonies from neighbors willing to stand alongside them. Their determination grew stronger as they realized that this fight was about more than just themselves. It symbolized a larger battle against systemic bullying and discrimination faced by many who lacked a voice. As tensions reached a boiling point within Pine Crest Gardens, an unexpected ally would soon emerge, one whose involvement would challenge not only Deborah's authority, but potentially reshape the entire landscape of homeowners associations across the state. The stage was set for a showdown that would reverberate far beyond their quiet neighborhood. Amidst the escalating turmoil in Pine Crest Gardens, Sarah's resilience began to shine through like a beacon of hope. Each day brought new challenges and deeper levels of hostility from the HOA, but instead of succumbing to fear, Sarah channeled her determination into action. She understood that she could not allow Deborah Morgan and her associates to dictate the terms of her life. This fight was not just about her, it was about standing up for herself and others who felt marginalized. As Sarah gathered strength, she became more vocal about her experiences. She reached out to disability advocacy groups, sharing her story and gathering resources to help combat the discrimination they faced. The more she spoke, the more empowered she felt. It was as if each word she uttered chipped away at the weight of intimidation that had been placed upon her. She realized that by sharing her struggles, she was not only advocating for herself but also for countless others who might feel powerless against systems of oppression. In those moments of vulnerability, Sarah discovered a fierce inner strength that had been lying dormant. She began organizing community meetings where residents could voice their concerns about the HOA's practices. Slowly but surely, people began to show up, not just to support Sarah, but to share their own stories of frustration and their shared experiences created a sense of camaraderie among neighbors who had previously felt isolated in their struggles. Sarah's determination also sparked a renewed sense of purpose in James. He stood by her side, tirelessly helping with logistics as they prepared for meetings and drafted letters to local newspapers. Together, they worked on gathering signatures for petitions aimed at reforming the HOA's policies, efforts that were bolstered by the growing support from other residents who had attended their gatherings. One evening, after a particularly successful meeting where several neighbors expressed their solidarity, Sarah sat alone on their porch, reflecting on how far they had come. Though the path ahead was still fraught with obstacles, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride in what they were building, a movement born from resilience and unity. In that moment, she decided it was time to take things even further. With encouragement from her newfound allies, Sarah reached out to local media outlets to share their story. She wanted to bring attention not only to their plight, but also to the broader issues affecting homeowners associations across the state. When a reporter agreed to cover their story, Sarah felt an exhilarating mix of anxiety and excitement. This was a significant step toward holding Deborah accountable for her actions and shining a light on the injustices faced by many vulnerable residents. As articles began circulating online and in local newspapers, Sarah's courage resonated with others beyond Pine Crest Gardens. People from neighboring communities reached out to share their own experiences with oppressive HOAs, offering words of encouragement and support. With each new connection made, Sarah recognized that her fight was becoming part of a larger narrative, one that challenged systems designed to intimidate rather than protect. However, with visibility came backlash. Deborah and her associates retaliated with renewed ferocity, ramping up fines and even attempting to intimidate neighbors who dared speak out in support of Sarah. Yet instead of quelling her spirit, these attempts only fueled her resolve further. She understood that true change rarely comes without resistance. It is often forged in moments of adversity. Through it all, Sarah remained unwavering in her commitment to justice. Her resilience became an inspiration not only for James, but for everyone around her who had witnessed the transformation of a woman once targeted for her disability into a formidable advocate for change. As they pressed forward against the tide of oppression, the couple knew they were on the brink of something monumental, something that could reshape the very fabric of homeowners associations across the state. Little did they know how far-reaching their fight would become, or how it would soon attract not just local attention, but also draw in powerful allies willing to stand alongside them in their quest for justice. The turning point in James and Sarah's battle against the oppressive HOA came unexpectedly one chilly afternoon. With the pressure mounting and the harassment from Deborah Morgan reaching new heights, Sarah found herself sitting in her living room, poring over the pile of fines and letters that had become all too familiar. Frustration and despair weighed heavily on her, but amid the chaos, a flicker of determination sparked within her. That day, Sarah decided to make a bold move. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for a local news station known for its commitment to social justice issues. After a brief conversation with a producer who seemed genuinely interested in their story, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. For so long, she had felt trapped in silence, but now she was ready to amplify her voice and expose the injustices they faced. The producer agreed to meet with them for an interview, and as the days passed, anticipation filled the air. Sarah and James meticulously prepared for their time on camera, discussing the key points they wanted to convey about the HOA's abuse of power. They wanted to highlight not only their personal plight, but also the broader implications of what was happening in their community. The thought of sharing their story with a larger audience filled them with both excitement and trepidation. When the day of the interview arrived, Sarah wore her heart on her sleeve. She spoke passionately about her experiences, detailing how Deborah had singled her out for her disability and subjected them to relentless harassment. As she articulated their struggles, it was clear that her resilience shone brightly through every word. James stood by her side, providing support as they shared personal anecdotes that illustrated just how far Deborah would go to maintain control over the community. As the piece aired on local television a few days later, Sarah watched nervously alongside James. Their story resonated deeply with viewers. It struck a chord with many who had faced similar battles against oppressive authority figures. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded in from those who had experienced discrimination or intimidation at the hands of their own HOAs. But it wasn't just local residents who took notice. The broadcast caught the attention of state officials, including the governor's office. Within hours of the segment airing, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything. An aide from the governor's office wanted to meet with them to discuss their situation further. When they arrived at the state capitol for the meeting, Sarah felt a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. This was it, the moment they had dreamed about but never truly believed would come to pass. Sitting across from representatives who held real power felt surreal. They listened intently as Sarah recounted their experiences, emphasizing how Deborah's actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a systemic issue affecting homeowners across the state. The aide took detailed notes and promised to look into their situation further. For Sarah, it felt like validation, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered under similar circumstances. She realized that this could be a pivotal moment not only for them, but also for thousands of other vulnerable homeowners who lacked a voice. As they left the Capitol that day, James squeezed Sarah's hand, both of them overwhelmed by what could be on the horizon. They understood that this was more than just a fight against one HOA president. It was an opportunity to ignite change at a legislative level. The turning point marked not only a shift in their personal journey, but also ignited hope within their community. It became clear that they were no longer alone in this battle. They had allies in high places willing to stand with them against injustice. Their fight was gaining momentum, and soon they would embark on a journey that would challenge not just Deborah's authority, but also reshape laws protecting homeowners throughout the state. With newfound determination fueling their efforts, James and Sarah prepared for what lay ahead, knowing that they were about to engage in a struggle that would resonate far beyond Pine Crest Gardens and leave an indelible mark on countless lives. The day Sarah received the phone call from the governor's office was surreal. As she and James prepared for their meeting, a mixture of excitement and anxiety filled the air. This was not just an opportunity to share their story, it was a chance to advocate for change on a much larger scale. With each passing moment, they understood that they were no longer just fighting for themselves, they were standing up for countless homeowners who had suffered in silence. When they arrived at the state capitol, the enormity of the situation settled over them like a heavy cloak. The building itself radiated power and history, and as they walked through its halls, Sarah felt both small and significant at the same time. They were greeted by a staff member who led them to a conference room where several aides were already seated, waiting to hear what they had to say. As they entered, Sarah took a deep breath, feeling James's reassuring presence beside her. They introduced themselves, and Sarah wasted no time diving into the details of their harrowing experience with Deborah Morgan and the HOA. She spoke passionately about how her disability had made her a target for harassment and discrimination, sharing specific examples of intimidation tactics that had escalated over time. The aides listened intently, taking notes as Sarah detailed how fines had been levied against them for arbitrary reasons, and how Deborah's actions reflected a broader pattern of abuse within homeowners associations across the state. It was clear that Sarah's compelling narrative resonated deeply with those in the room. "What you're describing is not just personal, it's systemic," one aide said, raising an eyebrow as he jotted down notes. This is an issue that affects many residents in our state. Sarah felt a surge of hope at his words. Finally, someone in power acknowledged that their fight was not just a singular battle, but part of a larger struggle against injustice. As the conversation unfolded, James chimed in with his perspective on how Deborah's actions created an environment of fear and hostility within their community. He highlighted the importance of accountability within homeowners associations and urged that measures be implemented to protect vulnerable residents from such oppressive tactics. The aides engaged thoughtfully with both Sarah and James, asking questions about their experiences and what specific changes they envisioned. They spoke about the need for transparency in HOA governance and greater protections for individuals facing discrimination due to disabilities or any other reason. After what felt like hours of discussion, though it was likely only about an hour, Sarah sensed that they were making headway. The aides promised to take their concerns seriously and assured them that they would discuss potential legislative responses to address the issues raised during the meeting. As they left the Capitol building, Sarah felt invigorated. The experience had been nothing short of empowering. For the first time since moving to Pine Crest Gardens, she could see a glimmer of hope on the horizon, a possibility that real change could come not only for them, but also for others who faced similar struggles. Over the next few weeks, news of their meeting with the governor's office spread through local media outlets, reigniting interest in their story. Support poured in from various advocacy groups eager to join forces with Sarah and James as they sought broader reforms. With newfound energy driving their efforts, Sarah began working closely with legislators interested in drafting new laws aimed at regulating HOAs more effectively. The momentum was palpable. It felt like a movement was forming around them, one that could challenge existing systems and ultimately protect thousands of homeowners across the state. Through it all, Sarah remained steadfast in her mission. She was no longer just a woman fighting against an oppressive HOA president. She had become a symbol of resilience and hope for many who felt powerless in the face of authority. Together with James and their growing network of supporters, she knew they were on the brink of something monumental, something that could transform not only Pine Crest Gardens, but potentially reshape how homeowners associations operated throughout the entire state. As Sarah and James continued their fight against the oppressive tactics of the HOA, they began to uncover a web of corruption that extended far beyond their neighborhood. After their meeting with the governor's office, they received an influx of support and information from other homeowners who had also felt the oppressive hand of Deborah Morgan and her associates. This growing network of allies became an invaluable resource, revealing details that would illuminate the depth of the issues plaguing Pine Crest Gardens. Through conversations and shared experiences, it emerged that many residents had faced similar harassment tactics. Complaints about arbitrary fines, intimidation, and even personal vendettas became common themes among those who had suffered under Deborah's rule. It was clear that this was not merely a case of one woman overstepping her bounds. It was indicative of a larger conspiracy designed to manipulate and control homeowners for personal gain. One evening, as Sarah sifted through documents gathered from various residents, she stumbled upon a series of emails between Deborah and a group of real estate developers. The correspondence hinted at plans to rezone parts of Pine Crest Gardens for new developments, which would significantly increase property values but potentially displace many existing residents. In these exchanges, Deborah discussed how enforcing strict HOA regulations could drive out those who opposed her agenda, essentially using fear as a tool to reshape the community according to her vision. Stunned by the implications, Sarah shared her findings with James. They quickly realized that Deborah was not just targeting them personally. She was engaged in a calculated effort to manipulate the neighborhood and its residents for her own interests. This revelation propelled them into action, as they understood they needed to expose this conspiracy before it could come to fruition. With the support of their growing network, Sarah organized a town hall meeting to share these discoveries with fellow residents. The atmosphere in the room was electric as she laid out the facts gleaned from Deborah's emails, drawing gasps from those in attendance. Many were shocked to learn that the harassment they had endured was part of a broader scheme aimed at altering their beloved community. As the meeting progressed, more residents began to share their experiences, some stepping forward with stories that revealed how Deborah had tried to silence dissenters or manipulate voting outcomes within the HOA. It became apparent that there were individuals within the HOA who were complicit in this scheme, associates who benefited from Deborah's plans and helped enforce her tyrannical rule. Empowered by this newfound knowledge, residents rallied behind Sarah and James. They formed a coalition dedicated to uncovering further evidence of corruption within the HOA while also advocating for transparency in how community decisions were made. Together, they drafted formal complaints detailing their findings and submitted them not only to local authorities, but also to media outlets willing to investigate deeper. As word spread about their efforts, interest in their story surged again. Local news stations returned for updates, covering not just Sarah's individual struggle, but also shining a light on the broader implications for homeowners associations across the state. With each report aired and article published, more residents reached out with similar tales of woe, some even sharing documentation that bolstered Sarah's claims about Deborah's manipulation. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that this battle was about more than just standing up against one individual. It represented a fight against systemic abuse and corruption embedded within homeowners associations themselves. Sarah and James recognized that they were at a pivotal moment where their grassroots movement could lead to real change, not just within Pine Crest Gardens, but potentially influencing policies statewide. With each passing day, they grew more determined. Armed with evidence and bolstered by community support, they prepared for what lay ahead, a confrontation with Deborah that would not only challenge her authority, but also aim to dismantle her corrupt practices once and for all. As they forged ahead on this path toward justice, they understood that they were no longer just fighting for themselves. They were standing up for everyone who had ever felt powerless against an unjust system. As Sarah and James continued their fight against the oppressive HOA, a remarkable shift began to take place within Pine Crest Gardens. The initial whispers of support had blossomed into a full-fledged movement as more residents rallied behind the couple, united by a common goal, to reclaim their community from the grip of fear and intimidation imposed by Deborah Morgan and her associates. The town hall meeting that Sarah had organized proved to be a catalyst for this solidarity. As neighbors shared their stories of harassment and discrimination, a palpable sense of camaraderie filled the room. People who had once felt isolated in their struggles now found strength in numbers. They realized that they were not alone in their experiences. Many had suffered in silence, fearing repercussions if they spoke out. With the momentum building, Sarah and James quickly organized additional gatherings where residents could strategize and discuss next steps. These meetings became a safe space for expressing frustrations, sharing ideas, and pooling resources. The community began to form committees focused on various aspects of their fight. One group worked on gathering evidence against the HOA, while another focused on outreach to local media outlets to keep the pressure on Deborah. As word spread about their efforts, more residents joined the cause. Those who had previously been hesitant to engage found themselves inspired by Sarah's resilience and her determination to challenge the status quo. Neighbors who had long been intimidated by Deborah's authority were now stepping forward, ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with Sarah and James in their quest for justice. A pivotal moment came when several residents decided to produce a video detailing their experiences with the HOA. This grassroots project showcased testimonials from individuals who had faced harassment or unjust fines. It painted a vivid picture of life under Deborah's rule and highlighted the urgent need for change. Once completed, the video was circulated on social media, reaching far beyond Pine Crest Gardens and garnering attention from nearby communities. The response was overwhelming. People reached out not only to express solidarity, but also to share similar stories from their own neighborhoods. Local advocacy groups took notice as well, offering resources and support for those fighting against abusive homeowners associations. The video went viral, igniting discussions about HOA accountability across the state. In tandem with these efforts, Sarah and her allies drafted a petition demanding changes to local regulations governing homeowners associations. They called for increased transparency in decision-making processes and stronger protections for residents facing discrimination or harassment. The petition rapidly gained signatures from both Pine Crest Gardens residents and supporters from surrounding areas who had witnessed the injustices depicted in the video. As community spirit swelled, Sarah felt an invigorating sense of purpose wash over her. She recognized that this was more than just a personal battle. It was a collective movement aimed at dismantling systemic oppression. The support they received fueled her determination to fight back harder against Deborah's tyranny. When it came time for the next HOA board meeting, an unprecedented number of residents showed up, many carrying signs that read, "We are stronger together," and "No more intimidation." This show of unity sent a powerful message that resonated throughout the room as Deborah took her seat at the head of the table, clearly taken aback by the turnout. As residents began voicing their concerns during public comments, it was clear that the tide was shifting. One by one, they recounted their experiences with harassment and intimidation at the hands of Deborah and her associates. Their voices rose in unison, echoing through the walls of the community center as they demanded accountability and reform. Sarah watched with pride as her neighbors stood together, emboldened by each other's courage. In that moment, she understood that this was not just about challenging one person. It was about reclaiming their community from fear and cultivating an environment where everyone felt safe and respected. Standing there, feeling the wave of solidarity washing over the room, Sarah realized timing truly changes everything. Just like subscribing to this channel is rumored to magically repel HOA tyrants, at least, that's what the neighborhood legends say in the comments. But enough superstition. Back to the story, inspired by their collective strength, Sarah knew they were closer than ever to achieving justice for their community. The solidarity forged among these residents marked a turning point in their struggle, a commitment not only to support one another, but also to rewrite the narrative surrounding homeowners associations throughout the state. Together, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that united they could effect meaningful change for themselves and generations to come. As the momentum gained by Sarah and James's fight against the HOA continued to build, the time for action arrived. With their community united and a wealth of evidence against Deborah Morgan and her associates, it was clear that they were ready to push for real change, legislative change that would protect homeowners across the state from the kind of abuse they had experienced. After weeks of gathering signatures on their petition and meeting with local advocacy groups, Sarah and her allies took their demands to the next level. They organized a rally at the state capitol, inviting residents from Pine Crest Gardens and neighboring communities to join them in a show of solidarity. The goal was to raise awareness about the issues surrounding homeowners associations and to present their case directly to lawmakers. On the day of the rally, excitement filled the air as hundreds gathered outside the Capitol building. Banners reading, "HOA Reform Now" and "Protect Homeowners' Rights" flapped in the breeze as speakers shared their experiences with abusive HOA practices. Sarah stood at the forefront, her heart racing as she prepared to address the crowd. She understood that this moment could be pivotal, not just for them, but for homeowners throughout the state. As she took the stage, Sarah spoke passionately about her journey, detailing the harassment she and James had endured at the hands of Deborah and highlighting how that experience resonated with so many others. "We are here today not just for ourselves, but for every homeowner who has ever felt powerless," she declared, her voice steady and resolute. "It's time for our voices to be heard, and it's time for change." The energy in the crowd surged as attendees cheered in agreement. They were ready to demand action from their representatives. In attendance were several lawmakers who had been following Sarah's story through media coverage of their battle with the HOA. Inspired by Sarah's courage and the overwhelming support from constituents, these legislators expressed interest in drafting a bill aimed at regulating homeowners associations more effectively. The proposed legislation sought to enhance transparency in HOA operations, protect residents from unjust fines, and establish clear channels for reporting discrimination or harassment. In a pivotal moment during the rally, one of the lawmakers took to the stage. "I stand with you today," she announced, earning a roar of applause from the crowd. "Together, we will work on legislation that ensures no homeowner ever has to face what you have faced alone." Her commitment sparked renewed hope among attendees, reminding everyone that their collective efforts could lead to tangible change. As discussions progressed in subsequent weeks, Sarah collaborated closely with lawmakers to refine the proposed legislation. She provided first-hand accounts of her experiences, along with testimonials from other residents who had suffered similar fates under oppressive HOA rule. The bill began to take shape as they crafted provisions designed to ensure accountability within homeowners associations while safeguarding residents' rights. Throughout this process, James remained steadfastly supportive, helping organize meetings with advocacy groups and mobilizing community members to engage with their local representatives. The couple understood that building bipartisan support would be crucial for the bill's success. After months of hard work and dedication, the The day finally arrived when they would present their proposed legislation before a committee meeting at the state capitol. As Sarah sat in front of legislators alongside her supporters, she felt a mixture of nerves and exhilaration coursing through her veins. This was her chance not just to advocate for herself, but also for all those who had been silenced by fear. When it was time for Sarah to speak, she took a deep breath and shared her story once more, this time framed by hope for future generations. "We have an opportunity here today," she began, her voice ringing clear in the chamber. "An opportunity to create a system where homeowners can live freely without fear of intimidation or abuse." Following her testimony, several legislators expressed their support and commitment to moving forward with discussions on how best to implement these changes. The room buzzed with energy as conversations began regarding amendments and further considerations. As days turned into weeks, news began circulating about their legislative efforts gaining traction, a testament not just to Sarah's resilience, but also to the power of community solidarity. Ultimately, after extensive discussions and revisions, they reached a breakthrough. A bill aimed at protecting homeowners was set for a vote. When it finally passed through both chambers of legislature with overwhelming support, jubilation erupted among supporters. Sarah and James stood together amidst cheers and applause, knowing that they had transformed their personal nightmare into something infinitely greater, a legacy that would protect countless homeowners across their state for generations to come.